You did also, Blanche, in the book, mention flattery. You thought that might have been a weakness.
Quite seriously, for all political leaders, flattery is a terrible pit into which they can too easily fall, because they're constantly surrounded with flatterers. And if somebody is very friendly and outgoing, as Bob is, and inclined to think the best of other people and the best of himself, it makes an easier target for flatterers to get in. And that was something which I know his staff had to protect him from all the time. And they're everywhere. You've got to beat them off with a stick around political leaders, don't you? Yeah. And the greatest danger for them is that they find themselves surrounded with yes men instead of with people who are going to give them the famous, frank and fearless advice. But Hawke was very lucky in that he had a number of advisors, and probably the chief among them was, in terms of toughness, was Peter Barron, who's from New South Wales, and very, very forceful, very intelligent, very bright, and never quailed from calling a spade a bloody shovel. And he would speak very straight to Bob, as would others, but Peter...
I'd make this point. It's not in defence, because I accept the things you're saying, but remember this, that the first thing I said to my staff when they were first assembled, and you came in late, you weren't there at the beginning.
86.
Yeah. But when we first met, I said to them the same thing as I said at the first meeting of the heads of department. I said, I don't want, and it was particularly important with the heads of department, because I'd pick my staff and I knew that they would be direct and straightforward and say what they thought. But I said to the heads of department, I had them all in, I said, there's one thing I've got to say to you at the outset. I don't want you or the people under you to be saying to me or writing things for me which you think it's what that you think is what I want to hear. I want your real opinion. And that was what I insisted upon from the public service and my own staff, as you know.
I just want to, we'll take some questions in just a moment, but I wanted to raise with you this issue that came up in the book and got a lot of media play, was on this fact that at one point you were quite depressed, and it was around 84, around the election. Now, to my way of thinking, that couldn't have lasted for very long, because as I said, I joined in 1986. There was no evidence of it then.
No, it lasted a matter of some months. But remember, it was around the time of the 84 election, and there were two things. My discovery of my daughter's heroin addiction, which was just an indescribable kick in the guts and sadness. But I also had that physical thing at the same time where I got smacked in the eye with that cricket ball on the first day of the election campaign in 84. And I went through that campaign in agony, literally agony every day. So that was a terrible period, the combination of those two things. But there's been an attempt, for obvious reasons, to say that went on for a long time. It just didn't. It matter maximum of 3-4 months.
Do you blame that for the performance in the 84 debate, when it was generally judged throughout the media that you'd lost it to Andrew Peacock?
Yeah, I was not just the debate. The whole of that campaign was physical and mental agony. It wasn't the Bob Hawke that I knew and the Australian people knew.
So I remember in 1990, there were 13 staff sat around deciding whether there should be a debate in 1990 when Peacock was again the opposition leader. Uh-huh. And 12-1 said there shouldn't be. I was the one that thought it was a good idea, and I put the argument that Peacock was short on detail and that you'd had 6 or 7 years' experience as Prime Minister, so now you were likely to win it, and perceptions would be different this time around. So I put the presentation, and the numbers at the end of it were still 12-1. And then I was able to tell them that you'd already made up your mind anyway, that you're going to have a debate.
Yeah.
If you'd scripted it on that occasion, it may be that debates wouldn't have been a part of the normal discourse.
Yeah. And, of course, you didn't finish the whole story. You people from the staff had been doing a negotiation about the details of the debate, and you told me there'd be no notes.
That's right.
So I was there working away in the study at Kirribilli, and you blokes, a couple of you, were you one of them?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought you were. Yeah, I can tell by the way you're blushing. They come in and tell me, oh, it's changed. There are now going to be notes, and Peacock will be having notes, so I thought, bugger it.
Well, we turned up, and Jeff Walsh and myself, to check out the place, and Tony Eggleton was there for the Liberal Party, and he had a separate lectern, and we said, what's going on here? And he said, that's for Andrew's notes. And we said, but the agreement was no notes. And he said, no, look at the fine print, it's optional. Well, it was optional, and so I said to Jeff Walsh, who's going to tell Bob? Because he spent the last 4 hours committing everything to memory. And then we got out of it because we came up with this idea that we would then tell all the networks that night that Bob would be operating without notes. You decided to go ahead with it because you'd done all the work anyway. Yeah. And they all led their bulletins that night on the Sunday night before the debate with the fact that this bloke would be going without notes and Andrew would be using notes. Yeah. And I think we got a psychological edge, certainly in the minds of some of the media. Yes. Okay, look, there's some more questions, obviously, on contemporary politics and what might happen over the next week or two, but can we take some questions in the meantime? I think we've got a roving mic, have we?
There's one. There's a man there.
This one? Yep.
Bob, the headline here is Big Ideas. We've just gone through an election campaign where I suspect that there's hardly one idea that anybody could point to that any leader of the parties came up with that we could digest that was a good idea going forward. And it seems to me that we've reached a point where the Australian public is treated with disrespect and the politicians take a paternalistic view that they know best and they'll throw a bit of money around and we don't need to know because they'll get it right. And we no longer seem to know what the good ideas are, the big ideas are, and where we are supposed to be going into the future. Do you have a comment about that?
I think the obvious example our minds all immediately would turn to when listening to that question, myself listening with difficulty, is climate change. And this, of course, is interwoven into the politics of today, this very day. You had a situation where Kevin had grabbed hold of this issue and said it was the greatest moral challenge of our time. And anyone who wouldn't face up to it was a coward. And so that was a big idea. It was, we were going to be really committed to acting decisively on this issue. Well, that went haywire. And I think that introduced once that happened, that was the beginning of the undoing of Kevin, because people had reacted positively to his pitching of it at that very, very high level of importance. And then when he put it on the back burner, I think they were saying, not just on that issue, they were disappointed about that issue, but I think it was going to your issue of saying, well, how dinkum are our politicians about the big issues? Are they more concerned about acting in a way which is going to guarantee their electoral success? Now, my own view about this issue is quite clear. Barry mentioned one big issue, the means testing, asset testing on pensions. Now, we were at a situation when we came into office that we inherited an enormous deficit from John Howard, the previous Treasurer, and that put big, severe limitations on the things that we were able to do and that we'd promised, and we just had to look very seriously at where there was unjustified expenditures. And it was quite clear to me that it made no sense whatsoever for the Commonwealth Government to be paying out hundreds of millions of dollars in pensions to people who were enormously asset rich. It's not just a question of income testing, but asset testing. We were paying out pensions to people who could have arranged their affairs in a way which minimised income in a sense, but left them enormously asset rich. And so I said that's got to be changed. We've got to bring in asset testing. And Barry referred to the campaign that was waged by the Conservatives around this country and led by the Melbourne Sun Herald, Melbourne Herald.
The Herald as it was then. Yeah.
Herald as it was. And this was going to be the end of civilisation as we knew it, according to these people. And the pressure was so strong, I remember I had a delegation down in the Prime Minister's office from the New South Wales right saying, we can't support this, you've got to drop this. And I said, if a Labor government can't do this, it doesn't deserve to be in government. And I said, we're going to go ahead. And of course, people came to accept it. No one, I mean, it's just an article of faith now. It's never been questioned since. So I think there is a less degree of preparedness now, unfortunately, on both sides to be prepared to tackle the big issues and tackle the associated question, which we've referred to before, of education. I have always said I have faith in the Australian electorate. I've said, you've heard me say it so many times, Barry, that I think generally speaking the Australian electorate has got it right in elections over the years. So if the Australian electorate is told the facts, dispassionately told the facts, I think the evidence is, historically, that they'll respond. So I hope we're going to see more courage in our politics than perhaps we've experienced in more recent years.
Well, they got it right this time then. They didn't want anybody to win. And that's the result they got.
Well,
Yes. The question is, what do you regard as the really big decisions that you took in your time as Prime Minister?
Well, on education was a very the economy, number one, because it was in a disastrous state when the Hawke government took over. We were going south, and as Lee Kuan Yew had said, if Australia goes on the way it's going to be the poor white trash of Asia. So reforming the economy was the first issue. And going along with that was an emphasis on education. We had a very low retention rate of children going through to the end of high school. We were only 33%, and Bob's government managed to raise that to 67% in the time it was there. It did. People will be surprised to hear this perhaps now, but the word climate change was first used in 1989 by the Hawke government. It did a great deal for the environment. It renegotiated a treaty for mining in the Antarctic, so the Antarctic could never be mined. But perhaps the really most important thing with outside the country, which has gone to flow into the country, was the relationship with China in particular and the region in general. And that relationship that Bob established with the Chinese leadership, which was one of great intimacy, has and led to the establishment of the iron ore trade with China, is one that's flowed on to the rest of us now and created billions and billions and billions of dollars in wealth and hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of jobs. So, and also part of that was establishing APEC, the regional forum, which Keating then raised to a leaders' meeting. All of these things. The Hawke government brought Australia up from being below where it should have been to, as they say, fighting beyond its weight. Yeah.
So beyond those foreign policy initiatives and the economic reforms early on, is there anything else you'd like to throw in?
Well, I'd just like to, I agree with everything Blanche has said. I'd like to put the international stuff into this perspective. One of the things I hold most profoundly against our Conservative opponents has been their conduct of foreign policy. It has been absolutely disastrous for this country over a long period of time. They took us into Vietnam, where 521 Australians were killed. We should never have been there. The Labor Party opposed it. But the Conservative concept of foreign policy was see what the United States is saying and doing and asking and just putting up your hand and saying yes, which is what they did then. General Cosgrove fought there. He's had the decency since to come out publicly and say we should never have been there, but the Conservatives have never apologised for it. They didn't learn, and they took us into Iraq, where we didn't lose a great number of lives, but what Iraq did was to make the world even more unsafe in terms of giving added strength to the terrorist organisations. That's not just my judgment, that's the written judgment of every intelligence agency in the United States. Now, what I was determined to do was to make it clear to the United States and to the world that Australia was an independent nation, that we were not going simply to be the meek, unquestioning followers of the United States. President Reagan was kind enough to invite me to go over there very early in my Prime Ministership. I went in June of '83, and I told him to his face that I regarded the relationship with the United States as foundationally important to Australia. But I said, Ron, and to his Secretary of State, George Shultz, who was a good friend, I said, there will be occasions on which we think you are wrong and we will not support you. And that happened on a number of issues. And they respected that. And leaders, including Reagan and others, said well on into my Prime Ministership that the relationship between Australia and the United States had never been stronger than under us. So what I regarded as very important, answering your question, was that I wanted Australians to see themselves for what they were. That is, an advanced economy in the Asian region whose future destiny manifestly was going to be determined more than anything else by the quality of our relationship with Asia in general and China in particular. And that it was possible to have a very good relationship with Asia in general and China in particular while retaining a respectful and productive relationship with the United States. And I regard that, in addition to the economy, education and so on, as one of the foundationally important things that we've done. And I only wish that the Conservative side of politics had learnt the lesson.
It's not just what you do either, it's what you manage to control. And through your period in office, immigration, racial mix was never really an issue. Now parties duck for cover at the prospect of a big Australia. What's going on there? Is that really just about people fearing overcrowding, or is there something more insidious at work there?
Well, there's a number of elements in it. We do not do ourselves justice. Australians do not do themselves justice in recognising the magnitude of what we have done in the period since the Second World War. Just remember it, what we've done. We were 7 million people at the end of the Second World War. We're now 22 million. And that has happened not only by natural reproduction, but overwhelmingly also because we undertook one of the most massive immigration programs that has been exercised anywhere in the world. And we did it more amicably and peaceably than has ever been done anywhere else before. We brought in these millions of people. Initially, primarily the Anglo-Celts, but very soon we had Italians, Greeks, Europeans and so on. And then we got rid of the White Australia policy, and now the most significant, fastest growing element of our immigration is from Asia, which I think is marvellous. And we've done that. This great country, these great Australian people have been prepared to open their doors and their hearts to a very large extent to these people who've made the big decision to leave their countries and come and make their new home for themselves and their children here. Now, that performance, which has included a very large humanitarian and refugee program, that's something that we should be shouting from the bloody rooftops and saying, aren't we bloody marvellous? Because we have been marvellous by any standard you want to look at. And so the real issue ought to be, our politicians, all sides, should be just saying what I've said and making sure that the decisions are taken in terms of infrastructure which are going to enable the country to take in these people and try as far as possible to direct them or try and persuade them and give incentives to go to areas where they're most needed, so that those who are living under stressed circumstances are not going to develop some antipathy to newcomers. But if we were up there shouting from the rooftops the magnificence of the Australian achievement, this thing would come into perspective. Yeah. Let me finish up on a humorous note. There was, after the war, Churchill was devastated by the fact that the British public threw him out and gave the Labor Party an overwhelming majority. But then the next election, Labor won, but it was very, very close, and so, but Churchill was still the leader of the opposition, and the whips and everyone were watching very closely what was happening, sickness, health, death, and so on. And so this day, Churchill was sitting in the office, in his leader of the opposition's office, and the whip came in and told him that Smythe Jones, Conservative member for Whoop Whoop, had resigned the Conservative whip and joined the Liberal Party. And the immortal reply was, "This must be the first time in recorded history of a rat swimming towards a sinking ship." No, you could have something.
Thank you. Please thank Bob and Blanche.